The situation in the South American state is a serious challenge for domestic politics that does not yet speak of an inevitable breakup of the United States. The acuteness of the migrant problem has become particularly evident in the last couple of weeks. Obviously, the topic of illegal immigrants will be a key thesis of the Republican Party's campaign for the U.S. presidential election this November. According to CNN, in December 2023 alone, 225,000 people crossed the U.S. border illegally, the highest number since 2000. For 2023, the number of illegal migrants entering the country could reach 3 million, with a significant portion arriving just in Texas. According to local officials, the federal government is not taking active steps to address the problem. The Texas authorities refused to act in the spirit of Washington's instructions and began to realize their own vision of fighting uncontrolled migration, which, judging by numerous publications, a number of sources perceived as the beginning of a new civil war in the United States. The real situation is somewhat more complicated. The specific trigger of the actual phase of the crisis was the judicial conflict between the Supreme Court and the state courts. Texas began to build its own barriers on the coast of the Rio Grande, the main channel of transportation of migrants from Mexico to the U.S. In this area, the federal authorities began to dismantle these barriers. The state authorities sued and argued that state property could not be prohibited, on the basis of which they asked the federal authorities to cancel the dismantling. The trial court refused to prohibit the dismantling. The appeal reversed this decision and prohibited the dismantling. The Supreme Court overturned the appeal. That is, the situation returned to the original. In fact, now in Texas, the federal government can dismantle fences, and the state government can install them. So the situation comes down to who has more patience, and so far, it's Texas. There's another Texas law that governs the state-level crackdown on illegal immigrants. The crux of the problem here is that this law ignores the Supreme Court's 2012 precedent-setting decision in U.S. Government v. Arizona, where the Supreme Court barred the state from enacting migrant accountability laws or taking steps to do so. So far, there is no talk of civil war, but there is a clear crisis in the American, or rather, Biden Democratic vertical of power. Texas Governor Greg Abbott was endorsed by 25 other Republican governors. More specifically, a letter released in support of Abbott states Texas' right to self-defense, which they support. South Dakota Governor Noam Christ even offered to send reinforcements in the form of local National Guard units. She was supported by the governor of Oklahoma. The President of the United States has no authority to command the National Guard, so this is a feasible measure. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis also did not rule out that the state would provide similar support to Texas. In Texas itself, Lieutenant Governor Patrick urged Biden to get out of the way and indicated a willingness to accept volunteers from other states. The Texas National Guard has taken full control of part of the U.S.-Mexico border, denying access to it to U.S. federal border agents by a decision of the state's attorney. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security demanded immediate access, but Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton issued a written denial. Greg Abbott has officially declared a state of what can only be characterized as a state of war. Abbott actively refers to Article 1, Section 10, Paragraph 3 of the U.S. Constitution, which gives states the right to provide their own defense in case of ineffectiveness of federal measures, and thus local legislation takes precedence over federal legislation. It is important to emphasize, the crisis in Texas did not arise suddenly. Back in 2021, Governor Abbott declared Mexican cartels as terrorist organizations and deployed armored vehicles and the National Guard to the border. As part of the state's Operation Lone Star State, Washington responded by cutting funding to the state to fortify the border and fight illegal immigrants. The Texas authorities and those who support them have not put forward separatist messages, but they are actively using rhetoric about the ineffectiveness of the federal government on the issue of migration. That is, claims are made directly against Joe Biden and his administration. It is easy to see that these theses are fully in line with the social agenda most Americans, regardless of their political orientation, recognize the problem with migration, and Donald Trump, who is on his way to becoming the Republican presidential candidate, has made border protection and internal security semantic dominant theme. There can be little doubt that the confrontation, at least media-wise, between Texas and the federal government will continue in the coming months. Rallying the electorate against the Democrats amid a common threat is too good an opportunity to pass up, especially since the Senate and House of Representatives are in the midst of debates over the new $61 billion allocation to Ukraine. And Texas' popular fight against migrants seems remarkably relevant today, boosting the Biden administration's motivation to give Republicans what they demand. Republicans are demanding that if money is given to Kiev, they will appropriately fund border security measures with Mexico. But the toughness of the demands is uneven, with some wavering willing to accept compromise versions of an agreement with Democrats that don't amount to a complete shutdown of the border. The Texas front looks like insurance, and, in this case, the agreeing senators will find it harder to negotiate with the Democrats. Texas will continue to generate high-profile news stories until the Biden administration backs down, which the Republicans will take credit for, or until the presidential election, and then the lack of response from the White House will also be used, but as a vivid example of the Democrats' indifference to the people's problems. In any case, the situation is favorable for conservatives.